And every week I used to really like interviewing Brian Clough, manager of Nottingham Forest. Who's heard of Brian Clough? Yeah, legendary manager. His teams played beautiful football. I'm a West Ham fan. I grew up in East London. But I loved the way Forest played football, and I thought he should have been the England manager, but he was just a bit of a maverick, wasn't he? A bit mouthy. And once I went to interview him, and he was signing a player, Steve Hodge, England international. His career had gone down a bit. He'd had to go and play for Tottenham. But now it was on the rise again. He'd come back to Forest. And unfortunately, he turned up with an agent, and Brian Clough would never deal with agents. Hey, young man, come back when he's not with you and we'll talk. Now, for those that know football, that is spot on, Brian Clough. That's my second best impression. The only one I do better than that is Betty Rackham. I've had to leave her out of the show. No one knew who she was. It was an old lady who lived opposite when I was a kid. But it was very good. Come back when he's not with you and we'll talk. So Hodge came back without his agent. They sat in Clough's office drinking whiskey for 5 hours, thrashing out a deal. Meanwhile, I'm standing outside in the cold with all the press, waiting for an interview, and we gradually realised we're not going to get one, because Brian is going to do what he always does, sell it to the Sun newspaper for £5,000, which is really annoying as a local radio person. So when he came out, after 5 hours of whiskey, and said, Steve Hodge has rejoined his hometown club, that's all I'm saying, thank you. I said, come on, Brian, tell the people of Nottingham tonight what the rest of the country will read tomorrow. And Brian Clough punched me in the face. And I went flying backwards, through a glass door, which opened, and I landed on his Labrador, Del Boy. Oh! So I got myself up thinking, I don't know how to cope with this. You know, being punched by one of your heroes, that's not in your BBC training. So I just asked him again, come on, Brian, just a quick interview. This time he shoved me through a door, slammed it shut. In his mind, he'd thrown me out. Actually, I was now in his office and he was in the corridor. So I looked around thinking, I don't know what to do. And then I just was reading a signed photo on the wall. To Brian, best wishes, Frank Sinatra. When the door opened, and it was little Archie Gemmell, assistant manager. Remember Archie, Scottish midfielder? Scored a brilliant goal for Scotland against Holland in the World Cup, went past about 4 defenders. And he said, young man, you better come with me. Brian's absolutely furious. He's from Paisley, you can probably hear. So I said, OK, Archie, can I do a quick interview with you? Aye, very quick. So he gave me a quick interview, and then I thought, I've got to go back to the BBC. I can't say I've been punched by Brian Clough. I'll try and make friends. So I found him in his office. He's chatting with the guy from The Sun. They're writing this little article. See you next week, Brian. See you next week, young man. You're the first reporter that I've punched this season, but you won't be the last. So I got back to the newsroom. Oh, I need to do a Nottingham accent now. Hey, up, me duck, what are you doing tonight? Going out? If you ever need to do Nottingham, you basically ask a question and then give an alternative for them to agree or disagree with. What do they call you? Jeremy? Who do you support? Forest? Where are you going? At? It's not a very efficient way of communicating, but that's how they do it. Who's punched you? Brian Clough? No, he hasn't. We've had the paper. No. Honestly, it hasn't happened. So I hushed it up. 6 months later, Forest won the League Cup final at Wembley. They beat Luton Town 3-1. I'm now waiting in the tunnel for an interview with Brian Clough. I can hear them all celebrating, and they're not doing any interviews. I thought, that's not right. You've won the cup. Do an interview. After half an hour, Cloughy came out just wearing a small white towel and flip-flops. Went through all the journalists, grabbed my arm. Hey, young man, come with me. Let's work. Took me into the changing room. The players are all naked, drinking beer out of the trophy, dancing around. It was very alarming. And Cloughy said, hey, you lot, keep quiet, because I'm going to give this young man an exclusive interview because I took his head off earlier in the season and he didn't tell anyone. So a lovely ending to that story. Good old Brian. Thank you. Don't usually get applause at that point, but that's it's very welcome.